Welcome to reality. You're now on the Code of Mind channel. Today, while I was looking for material for a new video, I stumbled across a debunking article. The classic format. The author, with a clever look on their face, explains that spiritual practices are self-deception, that quantum physics has nothing to do with consciousness, that neurosurgeons who write about the soul are just cashing in on miracles, and that any stories about leaving the body are simply mass delusion. But what hooked me most wasn't the article itself, it was the comments under it. I started reading and I could actually feel it. People enjoy having something to debunk. Lines like, "See? I told you all these practices are a scam." Or, "Finally someone said the truth instead of all your fairy tales." And in those words you don't hear calm confidence. You taste the sweet flavor of being right. Like someone isn't pouring wine into a glass, but their own ego. And slowly savoring it. And I got curious. What do they feel after they've proven miracles don't exist? What happens inside when you stamp the final seal? No higher powers, no consciousness affecting reality, none of it is real. It's all nonsense? For a second, it feels like you became grown up and rational. But if you listen deeper, behind those words you often don't find consciousness. You find ego screaming. I won't let anyone prove that the world is bigger than what I can fit inside my head. If I can't do it, then it doesn't exist. Consciousness searches. It asks questions. It's willing to admit, I don't know something yet, but I want to understand. Ego takes the easiest path. It denies anything that doesn't fit the familiar picture. Remember yourself as a child. A magician pulls a coin from behind your ear, and you get goosebumps. For a moment it feels like the laws of the world can bend, like there's someone who can do a little more than everyone else. In that moment your heart believes before your brain even switches on. And that feeling isn't about the coin. It's about the sensation. The world isn't as flat as they keep telling me. Then we grow up. We get trained. Be serious, be rational, don't believe in fairy tales. And now you watch the same trick from a different place. You search for the catch. Not to understand the wonder, but to kill it. Turning magic into a debunking is not a sign of maturity. It's a way to protect yourself from pain. When an unfulfilled dream is still living inside you, it's easier to say, all dreams are nonsense, than to admit, I'm scared to try again. That's how people appear who write long articles about why practices don't work, why someone else's story must be made up, and why everyone only does it for money. But behind every one of those texts sits the same setting. I've decided in advance that miracles can't exist, so I'm obligated to find an explanation for why they don't. In that moment, consciousness isn't exploring, it's serving ego. And ego is terrified that one day it will have to admit, I could have lived differently, but I was afraid. Now it's the holiday season, and the best example is the story of Santa Claus. Picture a child who sincerely believes that when the midnight chimes hit, a portal opens. That this night is different from every other night. The child goes to bed with a tremble in the stomach, listens to the floor creak, and believes that somewhere in the hallway a bag with their miracle is rustling. And next to them is an adult, exhausted, carrying the weight of loans, divorces, disappointments. At some point the adult looks at the child and thinks, it hurt me to believe in miracles. I don't want them to get disappointed later the way I did. And instead of gentle growing up, they choose a direct euter, a straight hit. Remember this, there's no Santa Claus. It's all just parents buying gifts. In 1 second, the channel to wonder gets cut. Not because gifts stop appearing, but because the child gets robbed of the right to believe. And those same adults later in the evening raise their glasses, write wishes on paper, burn them, drop the ashes into champagne, stare out the window and say, let this new year be better than the last. They don't call it a miracle anymore. They call it a tradition. But the essence doesn't change. Deep down they also choose to believe. They just do it quietly, so no one sees their vulnerability. That's how the inner conflict is born. Inside one person lives both. The child who craves a miracle, and the adult who wraps themselves in the armor of a skeptic. Let's go back to that article. Some people wrote, "Thank you. Now I know for sure all these spiritual people are just con artists." Others, "Finally someone explained why nothing worked for me." And between the lines you could read one sentence. "Now I can officially stop trying. It's not my fear, not my laziness. It's them, the ones who promised miracles." Hate in those comments isn't just emotion, it's food for the ego. Every sarcastic emoji, every sneering diagnosis aimed at someone else's faith is a way to tell yourself, "I'm above it, I'm smarter, I figured it out." But here's the question. What's left after a person has torn apart everything others believed in? Usually, emptiness, and a sense of importance that evaporates quickly, so it urgently needs to be fed again with a fresh portion of debunking. Now I want to show you what a miracle is, and people have known it for thousands of years. Everything is right in front of us. Nothing is hidden. The only thing is, the choice is ours. Let's look at the image. The creation of Adam. On the left, a human. The body is relaxed, the arm is extended, but there's no effort in it. Like he's ready to receive, but he won't take a single step forward. On the right, the figure that for centuries was called God. But if you remove the religious labels, you'll see consciousness collected into a single image, the source from which the impulse of life comes. Between them is a tiny gap, just a few centimeters of air. And everything is decided inside that space. That gap is the space of human choice. Consciousness, call it God, the field, the universe, whatever is closer to you, always reaches its hand toward you. But the spark will not jump if you don't want to touch it. According to your faith, so it will be done to you. That isn't just a line from Scripture. It's the formula of that gap. If you keep your hand lowered and say, "I accept nothing, I only believe what I can touch," the gap stays empty. But if you allow yourself, even slightly, to say, "I don't understand everything, but I'm willing to admit the world is bigger than my picture," something starts happening inside that gap. And here's the most interesting part. If you look at the fresco deeper, many researchers notice that the figure of God and the angels is shaped like the outline of a human brain, as if Michelangelo is whispering across centuries. God isn't somewhere outside. God is in your consciousness. What we call the Creator looks very much like a field of mind that unfolds reality for us. That gap between the fingers is not the distance between a human and the heavens. It's the distance between you and your own I am. That's why it matters so much what you think inside that gap, what you believe, what kind of world you choose to support inside yourself. There's one more important thing people rarely talk about. A miracle is always a personal experiment, not a public referendum. When you share a fragile dream with someone who lives from resentment and cynicism, they almost always respond with a set of ready-made shablani, the same recycled lines. It doesn't work. They're all scammers. My friend tried it. Nothing happened. From the perspective of the quantum field, they're simply handing you their version of reality. They're defending a world where they don't have to try, don't have to change, don't have to face their fear. And if you're not confident yet, those words can actually cut your probability line. Not because the chance disappears, but because you stop feeding it with attention. That's why the less you expose your first fragile sprouts to the wind of someone else's skepticism, the easier it is for them to take root. When a miracle has already happened quietly in your life a few times, when you've seen how thought and state can turn into events, you don't need to convince anyone anymore. You just know. If you remove all religious labels, one obvious fact remains. Everything you've ever experienced in your life, you experienced through consciousness. Every pain, every love, every insight, every coincidence, mistake, and impossible rescue. All of it played on one screen, inside you. And if you imagine God as that inner source of awareness, a huge amount of conflict disappears. God stops being a figure sitting somewhere out there, handing out miracles like tickets. He becomes the one who reached for your hand before you ever entered this body, and keeps that hand close while you live your human role. And then the entire battle between faith and skepticism becomes one question. Am I willing to admit that my inner reality affects the one I see outside? If your answer is no, you'll live in a world where everything is random and meaningless. If your answer is even maybe, experience will start arriving that slowly expands your picture of reality. Now I want you to look not at the debunkers, but at the people who held on to their "I want it" until the very end. People who became known not because they got lucky, but because they didn't quit when the whole world said, "It won't work." Walt Disney. He was rejected hundreds of times for funding. Banks and investors thought he was insane when he came with the idea of an amusement park and an animation industry. They called him a dreamer who didn't understand real life. But he kept drawing his world, and one day that world became reality for millions. Henry Ford. Before Ford Motor Company, he had several failed businesses. He faced failure, bankruptcy, ridicule. Any debunker back then would have written, "The automobile business doesn't work and it's a scam." But Ford got back up again and again because he could see one image in front of him. A future where every person has their own car. Howard Schultz, Starbucks. When he walked into investor meetings with the idea of a coffee place where people would simply want to be, he was told over and over, "No one needs your expensive coffee. This won't work." But he kept going. And today, millions of people sit in cafes like that all over the world, without even thinking about how many rejections stood behind that miracle. And those are just the names the whole world knows. Every day, thousands of ordinary people do the same thing in silence. They dream, they try, they fall, they get back up, they take steps toward their impossible, and it works. Miracles are not a magic wand. Miracles are the combination of desire plus movement. If you dream and do even something, anything, for your dream, you're already moving your reality. Not instantly, not on the first attempt. But space responds to persistence. That's why I want you to look at people like that. People who didn't prove that nothing works. They kept walking forward until it worked. Miracles exist. But they come to the ones who believe and act, not only to the ones who debunk and argue. I'm not telling you to hate skeptics and debunkers. They have their role too. They're useful for those who aren't ready to take responsibility for their reality yet. For those who find it more comfortable when someone always says, "Relax. Nothing works. You're not missing anything." It's like a service that tells a person, "You can stay in your cage. It's safe here. Everything is tested." But at some point, another voice may wake up inside you. Quiet, but persistent. It won't argue in comment sections. It will look at your life and ask, "Did you really try everything before you declared the world empty?" And that question is where real awakening begins. Consciousness works with any program. You can load into it belief in spirits, the law of attraction, strict materialism, or the idea that the world is a hologram, and reality will honestly reflect whatever you installed inside it. So the main question isn't who is right. The main question is, what program do you want to live your life with? Thank you for your attention, for your awareness, and for not being afraid to ask uncomfortable questions of the world and of yourself. I wish you personal miracles, a peaceful sky inside your inner universe, and faith in yourself that you no longer need to prove to anyone. Stay with me on the channel, subscribe. See you in the next videos. Bye.